This documentary is dedicated to those unsung heroes of 1857, the first War of Independence, and the great revolutionaries who followed them to the Andamans, to be incarcerated in the cellular jail, to suffer inhuman and barbaric atrocities for the freedom of their motherland. And those martyrs who made it possible for us to live with our heads high as free citizens of an independent country. The British conquest of India was complete in 1856. Ever since the establishment of the British rule in India, it met occasionally with resistance from local leaders, peasants and tribals. Other dispossessed rulers, zamindars and chiefs, but these resistance were confined to smaller regions. The War of Independence against the British by the Indian rulers started from as early as 1757. When Nawab Siraj-ud-Dawla of Bengal waged war against Lord Clive, Tipu Sultan defeated the British many times and checked British expansion in south. Rani Lakshmi of Jhansi fought bravely against the British. Nana Sahib and his brave and able leader Tantia Tope kept the British troops engaged for 2 years in central India and Rajputana. The great Maratha leader Nana Fadnavis led the first Anglo-Maratha War. During 1806, the company Sepoy revolted in Belo. And in 1824, the 47th Native Infantry revolted in Barakpur. There have been scores of minor revolts against the British in different parts of the country between 1765 to 1856. But the mighty revolt of 10th of May 1857 that sparked in Meerut and assumed national character was the first war of independence of New India. Sparked on 9th May 1857 when 85 sepoys of native infantry were convicted for refusal to accept the greased cartridge in Barakpur. Fanned by the blood and sacrifices of the martyrs, the revolt took the form of a gigantic fire which engulfed the entire nation. This was the fire which never extinguished. The sepoys made assault on Delhi, and Delhi was captured. 80-year-old Bahadur Shah, the last Mughal emperor, was proclaimed the Emperor of India. But soon after the widespread challenge and the initial setback, the British reinforced themselves and were able to suppress the revolt and arrest the revolutionaries en masse. And Mangal Pandey, who led the revolt against the British, became the first martyr. Delhi was recaptured by the British in September 1857, and Emperor Bahadur Shah was arrested and taken prisoner. He was tried and exiled to Rangoon jail in Burma, where he died in the year 1862. Meanwhile, the British government in India had arrived at the decision to re-establish the penal settlement in the Andamans after it was abandoned in 1796, which was considered a convenient place for confinement of the prominent rebels away from the ordinary convicts in the Indian jails, lest they should infest them with revolutionary ideas and infuse in them the spirit of hatred against the government. Thus, the First Indian War of Independence of 1857, termed as Sepoy Mutiny by the British, supplied the first batch of political prisoners lodged in the Andaman jail. On 10th March 1858, the first batch of 200 freedom fighters reached the Andaman, with Dr. J.P. Walker, the first jail superintendent of the penal settlement, 4 European officers, an Indian overseer, 50 brigadesmen, and 2 native doctors. Subsequently, by the end of 3 months, on 16th June 1858, the position of prisoners transported in Andaman increased to 773. And soon, the Andaman acquired the notorious sobriquet of Kala Pani. The name Kala Pani was to infuse a sense of fear and awe. When the freedom fighters arrived, there was no adequate arrangement for their boarding and lodging. Immediately on arrival, the convicts were sent to clear Chatham Island. But due to shortage of drinking water on the island, Dr. Walker sent 3 gangs, each comprising of 25 convicts, to Ross Island for felling of trees and clearing operation for settlement. The task of cutting and clearing the jungles was given to the revolutionary freedom fighters. They were also employed to cut bamboos and bring thatching and to make huts for themselves. Most of these prisoners belonged to the rich and well-to-do sections of the Indian society, zamindars, nawabs, writers, poets, etc., normally dependent upon their retainers for manual jobs. The freedom fighters were subjected to soul-crushing labor in hostile conditions and were beaten mercilessly for the slightest lapse. The hardship and toil which they were subjected to were of severe nature, which were at times quite unbearable. The revolutionaries preferred death to such pathetic existence and were prepared to attempt an escape. On the 4th day after arrival, Narayan, convict number 61, attempted escape from Chatham by swimming to the mainland. He was made to alter his course by being fired at and was captured by a boat's crew and convicted for sedition and escape and was executed on Chatham Island. On the same day, convict number 46 suffered death by hanging himself at a secluded spot of Ross Island. When the tortures inflicted upon them became unbearable, the prisoners made desperate plans to escape. On 18th March 1858, 21 freedom fighters escaped in rafts from Ross Island, and on 23rd March again, 11 convicts escaped from Ross. The incidents of escape continued even after the naval guard was doubled. On 17th April and 22nd April 1858, more convicts escaped. 1/3 of the whole number of convicts got away within 51 days after arrival in the month of March and April. 228 convicts had escaped, 88 were recaptured, and out of them, 86 were executed the same day. The rest 140 uncaptured were never heard of. They were either massacred by the Aborigines or fell victims to starvation or disease. The The government was very worried about the escape cases. The cruelties inflicted on the political prisoners exceeded the limits of their endurance, which led them to adopt desperate measures to free themselves by force. About 200 Punjabi convicts made a plot to siege power in the settlement of Port Blair by force. On the 1st of April 1859, the conspirators attacked Walker, but he survived the attack because of the timely intervention of an Indian overseer and gangsman. After this incident, the tortures inflicted by Walker increased, and the prisoners were handcuffed in pairs, and these handcuffs were never removed. On the other hand, the hostile attitude of the aboriginal tribes, Andamanese, towards the British and the freedom fighters, whom they found occupying their homeland, continued, and the freedom fighters were often left to fend for themselves without any kind of protection. The act of organized resistance against the British reached its climax on 17th May 1859 in what is known as the Battle of Aberdeen. This battle of liberation was fought to oust the British from these islands by the great Andamanese and liberate the land that belonged to them. Fortunately for the British, an escaped convict named Doodhnath Tiwari, who had escaped from Ross Island on 23rd April 1858, who was treated kindly by the Aborigines and lived with them for about a year, came to know about the preparations going on for the attacks on the British. He left the camp at night and arrived at Aberdeen and informed about the attack, different forms of punishment. The flow of the freedom fighters to Andaman continued uninterrupted. The year 1863 to 1865 witnessed a series of trials in India by which all the principal leaders of the powerful Wahhabi revolt were arrested, and many were transported to the Andamans between 1865 to 1871. The Kuka, or the Namdhari movement that was started by Guru Ram Singh on 14th April 1857, was in full force in 1871. The movement had spread in all parts of Punjab, as well as other states, and threatened the British government. In 1871, many Namdharis were arrested and hanged, and in 1872, 66 Kuka rebels were tied to the mouth of cannons and blown to pieces, and some were sent to the Andamans. On 8th February 1872 occurred an incident in the Andaman that shocked the British Empire. Lord Mayo, the then Viceroy of India, was killed by one Sher Ali, a Pathan convict from the northwestern frontier in the Andamans. The convict Sher Ali was condemned to death and hanged in the Viper gallows on 11th March 1872. The Maharaja of Jagannath Puri, Gajpati Bir Kishore Singh Dev, was brought here on transportation, condemning him for a term of life imprisonment in 1879, concerning his involvement in helping the rebels in the First War of Independence, 1857. He was assigned wheat grinding, extracting oil from crushing copra. Consequently, he succumbed to death within a month in 1879. Vasudev Balwant Phadke organized an armed revolt in 1879 against the British in Maharashtra. After his arrest, he was sent to Aden, and his 14 companions were sent to penal transportation to Andamans. Tikendrajit Singh, the Maharaja of Manipur, led an anti-British uprising in Manipur in 1891. During this revolt, many British officers were openly executed by the Manipuris. The uprising was suppressed, and many leaders, along with the Maharaja, were executed, and some were transported to penal settlement in Andamans. By the close of the 19th century, the Andamans was flooded with the freedom fighters and mutineers. The settlement grew in size. By this time, the convicts, who were either murderers and had escaped the death penalty, or habitual criminals convicted of more heinous offences against persons and property were also transported to Port Blair from all parts of India and Burma. They were all hardened criminals between the ages of 18 and 45. By 1868, the number of convicts increased from 3,294 to 6,965. The authorities found it difficult to enforce discipline in the settlement. Thus, the C.J. Lyle and A.S. Lethbridge Commission was appointed in 1890 to study the penal settlement in the Andaman and make recommendations. Their view was that confinement within the walls of an Indian prison was a much more severe form of punishment than transportation to the Andamans. They recommended that the convicts in the Andamans should be confined during the first 6 months in solitary cells in a jail to be built specially for the purpose. And this was the genesis of the construction of the notorious cellular jail. Thus, the construction of the cellular jail in Port Blair began in 1896 at Atlanta Point by the Andaman and Nicobar Manual Settlement Order number 423, dated 13 September 1893. The Government of India has ordered the building of a cellular jail at Aberdeen to accommodate 600 prisoners at an estimated cost of 5,17,352 rupees, cash expenditure 95,881 rupees. Mr. McQuillan, sub-engineer, is to be in charge of it in addition to his other duties. Based on Quaker Jail in Pennsylvania, it was a new human concept in prison designs, one man to one cell. Convicts were building their own prison, carrying heavy loads, stones, and hacking the undergrowth. Prisoners were forced to put in hard labor. To accelerate construction work, about 600 convicts from different stations like Viper, Navy Bay, Phoenix Bay, Bridgegunge, and Dundas Point, etc. were engaged. About 20,000 cubic feet of local broken stone was used, while building materials were also brought in from Burma. The lime used in the mortar was obtained by burning raw coral from the innumerable coral reefs around the island. Some 30 lakh bricks made at Dundas Point and Navy Bay brick kilns were used to construct the jail. The system of separate confinement was started in 1897, when the construction of the jail was still in progress. The construction took 10 long years, and finally, the jail was completed in the year 1906. Thereby starts a new chapter in the history of the Indian freedom movement. The agonizing story, the awesome massive ramparts that's known as the cellular jail.